So I think it's very important to start off with the city charter and find out where you have that official power. And right now, those issues can be pretty easily addressed on how you prioritize them as far as water and sewage, us being under consent decree. But going beyond that, and what a lot of Shreveporters are more so aware of is the symbolic value of the mayor's office. That soft power, I think, is very important when trying to run for this position, on understanding how you're going to leverage that to make the city better. And that soft power, is just representing the city well. From a economic development perspective, I think you should be the marketer, the chief marketer for the city. You should go out to, financial centers, coastal areas where a lot of capital is collected, where we could use some outside capital, some private capital, and you have to market Shreveport. You have to sell Shreveport strengths. So. Yeah, that's a great question. So when I was 22 years old, I was a platoon leader in Baghdad, Iraq. I led, multiple soldiers. But what people don't know is I had a multi-million-dollar operating budget for the train up to go into Iraq, and then once we were in Iraq. So that training budget consisted of, weapon costs, vehicle maintenance, you name it. So I was managing a multi-million-dollar operating budget when I was 22 years old. And that was my first position in the Army. My last position in the Army, I was a company commander over 100 soldiers. And again, we had a very expensive operating budget. People have seen some of the DoD contracts, and I was a field artillery officer, and we had rounds that cost $80,000. So I've managed extremely large budgets before, and this wouldn't be any difference. On top of the fact that my undergraduate degree is in economics as well. Yes, so I think that's just like a pretty simple budgetary fix. I think we should only have what we can maintain. When we get stretched too thin and we're not able to maintain buildings, it does look pretty bad for that neighborhood and for the city overall. So I think we need to cut back on the buildings that the city owns if we can't maintain them. And we could sell the buildings and turn liabilities into assets at that point. And that also kind of bleeds into the conversation of the adjudicated properties that the city has to manage. And with that conversation, we have to make the process easier on passing over titles for adjudicated properties. And I've proposed having a legislative caucus here, because that's statute, how we pass over titles. But having a legislative caucus to where they go to Baton Rouge and pass laws to make it easier for us to do that, in order to, again, spur economic development, kind of get after the blight in our neighborhoods, and make Shreveport a nicer place in every neighborhood, and not just, certain ones. So. I would say this, as far as those, the downtown area and outlying areas, if you're going to grow a city, and if you're actually going to populate these neighborhoods, there is no city growing in America today that doesn't have a very robust downtown. So I think it's very important to start with the nucleus, and then you can build out from there. And what we've seen with trends is millennials will come, because millennials and Gen Yers, they want to work downtown, they want to play downtown, they want to grocery shop downtown. So what we see is millennials will flock to a downtown area where they can do that, but then once they start having kids and need to get them into certain schools and live in certain neighborhoods, then they move out of downtown. So first, we have to grow our city, and we have to attract people to our city, and that'll actually push people into the neighborhoods outside of downtown. I think, it's not even a longer term thing that's going to happen immediately. The way my specific ideas about economic development are twofold. One is focusing on, again, attracting things from outside, but also the second part is building things from within. On attracting businesses and capital dollars in from outside, we have to make sure we have an infrastructure that's prepared to accept those businesses and allow them to operate efficiently, etc. I went and spoke to City Council last year in February to talk to them about high-speed internet throughout the city. Chattanooga, Tennessee, for instance, cut their unemployment rate in half and raised their average annual income by like $20,000 within 10 years because of the efficiencies and the business their high-speed internet attracted. So if we were to do that, we would very much stage ourselves to receive the bigger corporations. Baton Rouge just got Amazon. Baton Rouge made sure that they had sites that were set up, again, that were modern. So we need to do that in order to really attract outside jobs like we need to. In addition to that, we need to work with our locally owned businesses, work with the big economic sectors like, healthcare industry, the oil and gas industry, to figure out how exactly we can grow those industries and grow our own corporations. I'm proposing that by saying that we should have an economic development department. We should do a nationwide search. We should be open to a nationwide search for an economic development director, an experienced economic development director, and that department can think about these things consistently. Right now, whenever you hear the current administration discuss economic development, they refer to the MPC. Well, that's I'm like losing the word for it. That's reactionary instead of being proactive, and we need to be proactive in attracting businesses here. So that's the kind of big thing for me. Again, attracting companies and capital from outside, working on what we have here, and doing it with the team set up to continually think about these things and continually facilitate growth in our city rather than just being reactionary.
Yeah, thanks.
Before I answer that question, and I always do this, I make sure I make the link between the crime problem we have and the economic problem that we have in our city. One of my favorite sayings is nothing stops a bullet like a job. So that economic part is very critical to how we solve the crime part. But in solving the crime part, I've been extremely vocal since April was the first candidate to say that the police chief, we need a new police chief in the city. And I understand the rules of the Civil Service Board, but I believe every mayor should be able to elect a new police chief. And I say that because leadership makes or breaks organizations. I've seen it firsthand in the military. And right now there are a lot of things operationally and administratively that don't make sense. Operationally, the ratio of officers that actually patrol to the ones that don't is not right. We have way too many doing administrative things. Another thing that's operationally doesn't make sense is a majority of our police officers are patrolling during the day when we're at work and not at night when peak crime hours happen. So operationally, we need to fix those things. Administratively, a lot of the paperwork isn't being done proper, and we've seen that play out on a national scene a couple months ago when the police officer assaulted the boy on the porch. He was fired months before for abusing his wife and getting arrested for it, but because they didn't do the proper paperwork, he had to be reinstated by the Civil Service Board, and we just can't have those things happen. So I would start at the top with him. The second thing I would do is increase police presence in our neighborhoods. Most of the time when police are in our neighborhoods, what I often hear is that they're there for something negative, to arrest somebody, to respond to something negative, instead of them constantly being there and actually developing a relationship with their neighborhood, getting to know the grandmothers that sit on the porch and drink coffee, getting to know the little kids that's playing basketball in the street. There has to be trust between the citizens and the police department, and I think that's been eroded quite a bit, and we see that in the number of homicides last year that we've actually made arrests for. There was 57 homicides last year, and it's about 40 of them that remain unsolved today. So again, if you create that trust in the neighborhood, if you keep the presence there and people know that the police officers will actually be there, they know they have a close relationship with them, then I think you can do it. So twofold: new police chief, new leadership of the police department, and increased police presence in our neighborhoods. Yes, I think that starts with the vision for that particular leader. I've studied some of the previous administrations, and it has not been as much turnover as I would have imagined once new mayors come in the race. And again, if you have a very clear vision on what you want the city to look like, and you start to do interviews with department heads and leaders and appointees, you need to make sure that they know that vision and that they can implement that vision and that they'll do so in good faith. So that will be the initial approach, to do the interview and make sure they understand and can implement my vision. And when you do that, the second component, you have to set up benchmarks and guidelines. For instance, appointees to the MPC right now, I will ensure, their number one rule would be facilitate business, don't obstruct business. And if you talk to business owners who work with the MPC, the story that you hear a majority of the time is that they obstruct, they were in the way, they weren't facilitating the growth of that business. So that would be my number one guideline for that. And obviously it would differ depending on what department I was, interviewing that department head with. I think every area is important for collaboration. Earlier I was talking about some of the soft powers of the executive of the city, the mayor of the city, and one of those soft powers is to be a leader. One of the advantages the mayor has is they can reach into public and private institutions and bring them together. So I think that's extremely important, and that starts with developing a good relationship with the city council to make sure you can actually have a functional government and you can get an agenda through. So I would definitely leverage those relationships and build those relationships, and talk to them about my vision, talk to them about their vision for their particular districts as well. Working with the CADDO Commission. The CADDO Commission works with the city on a number of topics, number of issues. It's a lot of cross investments in areas, so you have to build relationships there as well. And the state representatives I referenced earlier, I would like to do a legislative caucus after my first 6 to 12 months in office, after I really have discovered where all the troubles are. I want to do a legislative caucus, and I would like to work with Mayor Walker and Bossier as well for him to bring some issues to the table and for us to sit with the representatives from Northern Louisiana prior to them going down to Baton Rouge, so that again their number one priority can be the people of Northern Louisiana, rather than losing their way with partisan politics and you name it. So I would propose those collaborative efforts. On an economic front, though, I think I want to go into a little bit more detail on what I would propose as well. My economic development department would be working with the Chamber of Commerce, with the Downtown Development Authority, with NLEP, reach out to LEP on a pretty regular basis. I'm hoping it's monthly meetings that they can sit around the table, Committee 100, a couple other organizations, but I'm hoping we can sit around the table, again, around a unified vision and work together more regularly. And again, being proactive about it and not just waiting, and helping that the NPC can do that as well. Yeah, I think the most challenging thing affecting our community is economics. I think it's the root of the crime problem. I think the economic disparity is the root of a lot of social problems in our city. So I think it's economics. If we can build our city up economically and do it with parity, you know what I mean? And by parity, I mean the city will never reach its full potential if you have, great wealth focus in LB and you don't have anything in Cedar Grove, and what I mean? Because if you look at the crime problem, the highest murder rates, highest burglary rates, highest violent crime rates are in resource deprived areas. And when we come out on these lists, like 18 most murderous city in the United States, they don't have an asterisk beside it with the neighborhoods that these crimes occurred in. It's all of Shreveport that gets that indictment. And the same for our education ranking. So it's very, very important to make sure that we grow our city and we grow it with as much parity as possible, to take away, if poverty is focused in those areas, to make sure we're invested in those areas so poverty can go without. If blight is focused in those areas, make sure that we move it out so all of Shreveport is safer, all of Shreveport is cleaner, and all of Shreveport grows together. And I think that's the way we do it. So economic development, getting in those jobs, improving our infrastructure, building up corporations from within, creating more jobs from sectors like the healthcare sector, the oil and gas sector. I think that's a way we can do it. And making sure that the city contracting process is extremely clear and extremely fair to everybody. Yeah. So my top 3 priorities is crime, economic development, and again, making sure we just overall grow the city. We grow the city overall. And the way that we would do it, well, I've elaborated on the crime part, the leadership part, and increased presence, economic development part, working on things from outside, putting up a good face for Shreveport, and then building ourselves up within. And the equity part at the end is just building up our entire city together. Looking after every neighborhood, every person in the city. I shared this story at the Southwood Forum actually, but we were doing a training exercise prior to deployment, and there was it's called a negligent discharge. It's a huge offense in the military, but it's when somebody fires their weapon accidentally. So we had a negligent discharge, and that gets reported all the way up to, I was a platoon leader at the time. It gets reported like to my boss's boss's boss. So it was a huge deal, and it happened while we were out. So it would have been extremely easy for me to not report it, because it could look very poorly on my platoon that we had this serious incident within my platoon. It could, hurt morale, etc. And it happened while we were out doing a patrol. I asked who did it. We found out how it happened, and I immediately went back after we returned from patrol and I reported it. And I made the point is that I always heard at West Point that bad news does not get better over time. So I immediately reported it and let them know, yeah, we had a negligent discharge in our platoon and this was the facts attached to it. And this is why, although it could have temporarily saved me, you know, some strife with my platoon, or it would have temporarily made me look good, what it would have done is break down the good order and discipline of my platoon as well. So if somebody says, okay, the platoon leader tolerated this significant slip up, then he probably would tolerate other things. And I couldn't have that happen in my platoon. So again, I made sure that I did what we also call the harder right over the easier wrong. And you're gonna have to do that throughout government. You gotta keep people accountable. People have to know that leaders take rules very seriously, ethics extremely seriously. And that's actually the way you can optimize the effectiveness of government rather than having it, you know, operate less efficiently because people think they can cut corners here and there. What can I guess I would like to, you know, put it on the mind of the chamber again, to work with my administration, given I'm elected mayor of this city, and the economic development department that we'll build. You have a lot of tentacles in this community, and having you on board with a bunch of other stakeholders in our community, I think it's critical for us to genuinely grow the community overall, grow downtown, you name it. We have to work together. So I would hope the last thing is again to ask, you know, for you all to just be prepared to work with me in the future.